afternoon and good evening to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. This is the session on the ISO standards process, a look behind the curtain at how PDF standards are made. My name is Leonard Rosenthol, and I am the chairman of the ISO Technical Committee 171, Subcommittee 2, which is where most of the PDF standardization efforts take place, and we'll talk more about exactly what that means shortly. That's, of course, the point of the presentation. I am the project leader, again, another term we'll dive into, for a couple of the PDF standards, PDF-A, PDF-X, and also the XMP metadata standards. When I'm not doing standards, I work for Adobe as their senior principal architect for PDF and also for content authenticity. And if you'd like to get a hold of me following the presentation, here's some of my contact information. And of course, this presentation is available to you to refer back to at any time. So let's start down the rabbit hole of the ISO process. So why do we even bother doing this? What is the point of creating a standard, and more importantly, a successful one? Well, we're doing this because there's a need. And we want to ensure that that need is met in an interoperable fashion. If we just solve the need, but only for one company, that's a proprietary solution. That's not an open standard. That's not what we're trying to achieve with PDF or with many things, of course, in that regard. A standard needs to be maintained. We don't just want to create something, throw it over the fence, and that's it. It needs to be maintained, it needs to be updated, it needs to evolve as technology, systems, and the world itself evolve. And we'd also like to ensure that it is referenced by other standards, that it doesn't necessarily stand on its own. And of course, with PDF, that is absolutely the case for all of these things. And in keeping all of these success criteria in mind, we want to ensure that we don't create something that is not adopted. And so we do that by ensuring, again, that there is a need and that there's a consensus around that need. Just having one company or one individual come and say, I really need X, Y, or Z, but not really having the support of others, doesn't really say to us as a community, as an industry, this is something we should be investing in. And we want to ensure that whatever it is does not have a huge barrier for entry, whether that's a barrier in cost, a barrier in licensing, a barrier in implementation ability. We want to ensure it's something that everyone can implement and make as part of their own products and technologies. And so the ISO is the organization that we as the PDF community have decided to use for doing our standards. Now, of course, it's not the only one. There are various other standards organizations out there. You might have heard of things like the W3C, which does web standards, or the IETF, which does the plumbing of the internet. But the ISO is the biggest, most renowned, and well-established organization. It is the International Organization for Standardization, as the name says. It represents 164 countries at this time, and it's been around the longest since 1947 when it was founded in London. So we're sitting here on the shoulders of giants. We are leveraging a process, which you're about to hear about, which is used for standards, not only for technology standards like PDF, but even standards like, for example, one of my favorites is sun cream. So if you want to protect yourself when you go out in the sun and out on the beach, things like those SPF numbers you might have heard about, those are actually all ISO standards. So it's just one example of the many, many things that go on at the ISO. So the ISO is broken down by technical committees, or TCs. And here's a couple of examples. The two where PDF takes place, TC 171 is the one that I help chair. That's focused on document management, and that's where the core PDF work is. And TC 130 is around graphic arts and technology, and that's where the PDF subset standards focused on that marketplace. For example, PDF-X and PDF-BT are done. There's also committees, as I said, there's photography, geospatial, and things that aren't even technology oriented. Within each of those technical committees are subcommittees, SCs, working groups, WGs, and task forces, TFs. So for example, in TC 171, we have subcommittee 2, which again is where all the PDF work takes place. And in there we have, at the moment, 12 different working groups, each one focused on a different area. So working group 5 focuses on archiving. So that's where PDF-A is. Working group 8 is where the core PDF standard takes place. And as I said, we have a variety of others. On the other hand, in TC 130, they don't have SCs. They go right to working groups. And within their working groups, they have task forces. So working group 2 focuses on the graphic arts industry, and task force 2, for example, is where PDFX is done. Now, we understand how it's now organized. Let's talk about how we now break down each of those things in terms of the actual process. So any country that's recognized by the United Nations can become a member body, an MB, for a given standard. And they can either be a participating member of that standard, which means that they get a vote, or whenever there is a vote open, that country, that MB, gets one and only one vote. Or they can be an observing member, which means they can sit in on all the meetings and they get access to all of the documents and everything else, but they have no votes. And so within each of those countries, because there is only one vote for country, you need an organization that controls that and establishes what's called the Technical Advisory Group, or the TAG, for that country. So, for example, in the United States, that organization is ANSI. In the United Kingdom, in the UK, that's BSI. Germany has DIN, Japan has GIS, etc. Every country has its own organization that represents it, and for whom you as an individual, what we call a subject matter expert, which we'll talk about shortly, you represent that organization in that country. So, as I mentioned, companies or individuals participate at the level of the country for whom they represent, where they live. So, for example, I live in the United States, so I represent the US as a subject matter expert when I participate in standards. If you're familiar with Dietrich von Zegern, he's our vice chair of the PDF Association. He lives in Germany, so he represents Germany when he participates. Peter Wyatt, who is the association's principal scientist, represents Australia because that's where he lives. So wherever you live, that's the country that you represent if you're participating directly at the country level. Now, there's also a secondary way to participate. And that's what one of the things that we as the PDF Association offer you as a member of the association. And that's through liaisons. So the PDF Association is a Class A liaison to both TC 130 Working Group 2 and to TC 171 SC2. And that means that because the association has established the liaisonship, you as a member of the association get to fully participate in the activities. So you get all of the benefits of basically living in a country that would be a P member. You have access to all the documents and you get to submit a vote as part of the association. Or the association gets a vote and you get to be part of that. So this is one of the big advantages of being a member of our association and why it was important to us many years ago to establish that liaisonship. Now, in addition, for every one of these technical committees or subcommittees, one member country holds the Secretariat. That is a responsibility that controls the administrative leadership for that activity. And in this case, this last year, the PDF Association became the Secretariat for TC 171 SC2 on behalf of the United States. And so we did this because this means that the association is now able to not only drive the standardization process at the ISO level itself, but it means that we've now connected the PDF industry through the association and our membership directly to that standards process. And so there is no greater alignment than us maintaining that secretariat and guiding the standardization process, and also guiding and learning and educating the industry and those of you on this call, and of course those who have been participating in all of our PDF Oktoberfest. Now, some of the other terms you'll hear, some of the other roles and jobs at the ISO, there's a convener. So a convener is responsible for a working group, and they run the working group. So they don't represent a country when they're convening. Now, normally they would. They, of course, have a country that they live in that they represent. But when they're convening, they have no country. They're representing the ISO. And they're the ones who make sure that the meetings run on schedule, that minutes are appropriately taken, that action items and what are called resolutions are properly recorded and acted upon. So they sort of run or chair a given working group. Every document that is produced, so each of the standards we have, whether it's something huge like ISO 32000 Part 2, or it's something small like one of our subset standards, or even some of the even smaller pieces of work that we're working on, has to have a project leader. This is, again, the person who doesn't, while they're working on the project itself, doesn't represent a country. They're a neutral party representing, again, the ISO, and they're the ones who do all of the technical work to edit the document, to review comments, and we'll talk about that comment process soon, and make sure that basically the technical work takes place, and that's the role of the project leader. You may also hear the term project editor. That's an older term for this role, but so it's okay to use it, but we prefer project leader as the current term. And then, of course, there's all of the committee members. So every individual who attends the meetings, reviews the documents, sends in comments, is technically a committee member. That's the formal ISO term for that individual. We, within the PDF groups and occasional other groups, sometimes refer to these people as SMEs, or subject matter experts, because that's what you are. When you're participating in an ISO committee, you're doing that because you are an expert in that particular subject matter, and that's why you're coming to these meetings, is to give your expert opinion on the material. And so that's why we look forward to, and you'll hear and see things like SME notes. So these are notes specifically to SMEs that we want reviewed. We as project leaders, for example, will put those in documents to get reviewed. So these are some of our key jobs and roles. And then this goes into a process. And let me take you through this. Basically, a document has to go through a process, which this diagram shows off, to get from idea all the way to being a published standard. And so let me see if I can walk you through this. What we're establishing and have established recently is that when someone has an idea for a new standard or in addition to an existing standard, the association is asking that people bring that to the association, and that we can work out a lot of the gory details in the association in a much more agile fashion. We're able to have within the association, we can have more regular meetings, we can have more interactive document editing sessions. We don't have to work in the fully formal environment of the ISO. And so we're able to move things a little more quickly. And those of you who are already members may have seen that we've started up a whole bunch of new technical working groups. Each one of our technical working groups here at the association represents a new piece of work. Sometimes it might be more than one, but it represents at least one. So for example, we have our PDF reuse technical working group, which is focused on a new piece of work called well-tagged PDF. We have a new forms working group, technical working group, which is focused on advancing the forms technologies within PDF and bringing them into modern usage. We have an accessibility working group focused, of course, on advancing accessibility for PDF, and the list goes on. So if you're not involved in these, please go to your member area on the association website and join the various technical working groups that interest you. So we've got, as I mentioned, a bunch of new ideas that are floating around. So we're incubating them here in the association. When we feel that we've taken something far enough in the association, then what we'll do is we'll submit it to the ISO. So a good example of this is you might be familiar with PDF, what's now called PDF-R, and was originally called PDF raster, which was a collaboration with the Twain organization to replace TIFF for scanning and similar devices. So that incubated here within the association, and then when we thought we were ready, we brought it into the ISO. So goes from the association to the ISO, and we asked that a new work item be started. In order to start a new work item, we have to find 4 countries, 4 member bodies, who are willing to back it. And each one of those member bodies also has to recommend an expert to serve on the committee to do that work. So assuming you get that, then we continue on. If you don't, then the project doesn't go anywhere. We just had one recently in working group 12 where we were not able to get the 5 members initially. We went back and we started going after and talking to various countries and various experts to participate, and we're able to resubmit it and start it over again and now kick it off formally. So just because you can't get them originally doesn't mean it's dead. It just means you now have to do work to find people to participate and back your standard. But once you have those members, once you've cleared that process, that's when it really kicks off the formal piece of the process and also starts what we call the ISO clock. What that means is that when you start a process, start working on a document, you have to tell ISO how long you're going to work on it. And that's the maximum amount of time that you're allowed. And that's anywhere between 18 and 36 months. We used to be able to do 48 months. That's not allowed anymore. ISO wants faster work. So we're now limited, and you can't do anything shorter than 18 months. As you'll see, if you do the math with some of these other pieces, it's just not possible to do it any shorter than 18 months. So between 18 months and 36 months is the process. We tend within TC 171 SC2 to always go for 36 months because we would rather, and we'll talk about this in a bit, we'd rather finish early than have to deal with running out the clock. So we'll tell them 36 months, because again, we can always finish sooner. That you get points for that, just kind of like with software development. So we kick this off with a working draft. And so working draft goes out for what's called the review, comment, and voting period. And I'll go into the details of that shortly. But basically, each one of those periods lasts a minimum of 3 months. Sometimes it can be more, really can't be shorter than that, but it could go longer. And you'll go through as many of these as you want. The committee will decide when they feel that they have had enough working drafts and they're ready to move to the next stage, which is the stage of committee draft. So you can think of working draft as sort of, again, getting things ready. Committee draft is when you think you've got something you're pretty happy with and you're ready to start really refining it. And again, the committee draft process is exactly the same process in that you go through the review, comment, and voting process as many times as you'd like. And again, it's a minimum of 3 months per loop of this review, comment, and voting process. Okay? So we're going to go through those. When you keep doing these as many times as you want until your committee is sure that you have completed all the technical work and you believe the text is done. And the reason you have to basically feel that you are done, finished, ready to go is because unlike the WD and CD processes, the next step, which is called the DIS phase, the Draft International Standard phase, there's only one. So you only get one bite at the DIS apple. And so you need to make sure you are ready to go. So up over to DIS it goes. And again, we go through the same process of review, comment, and vote, but again, one and only one. And this process also takes longer. It's a minimum of 5 months. One of the reasons for the extended period is because at this stage, the ISO has permission to translate your standard into other languages. Most usually, that's either going to be French or Russian. Although if there are members of your committee that have specific requirements, they're also able to ask ISO for the translation at that time. And so the translation has to happen during that period of time. So that's why there is a minimum of 5 months that goes on in the DIS. So, and again, one and only one of those. So we know that that's going to last a minimum of 5 months. We usually think it's closer to 6, but officially from ISO, it's a 5-month minimum. At this point, we get back the results of the comments of that DIS. And one of two things is going to happen. Either everything was great, there were only what are called editorial changes, which are things like spelling errors or fix this word or things of that nature. They're not technical. That's the other type of change we'll talk about as a technical change. So if there's only editorial stuff, then what's going to happen is those editorial changes are applied and we go right to publication. That's great. That's the goal of every committee and every project leader, is to be able to go right from DIS to publication. And then you're done. The document gets published. Now, of course, I'm waving my hands a little bit here. The ISO has some internal processes they have to go through, so it doesn't just turn over the next day to publication. But basically, all the hard work of the committee is done, and the project leader will just work with the ISO Central Secretariat to just work through the last little bits of the details. But what happens if you weren't so lucky? What happens if there are technical changes that are introduced or requested at that point? Then what you do is you enter what's called an FDIS, or a final DIS phase. That only lasts 2 months. And again, there's one and only one of those. So that we go through the same process. And now, again, one of two things happens. Either, again, we only get editorial changes, which is what we really, really hope for. And in that case, again, just like previously, we'll go right to the publication stage. And that's good. That's our hope. However, if it fails, if there are technical comments that are received and accepted by the committee, then you go all the way back to the committee draft phase. This is sort of like, landing in jail in the Monopoly game, or Chutes and Ladders, where you have to go all the way back again. So you don't want to end up here, because it's going to take you back in the process and will now take longer for the standard. You don't necessarily get points off. It just means your standard will take longer to deliver. So we don't want that to happen. And so it's the goal of every committee to focus on ensuring that that doesn't happen. So this is the process. This is why it takes a minimum of 18 months. When you add in all of these months of interim stages, plus also consider that you have to have meetings along the way as well. So you have to be able to schedule meetings. Historically, those would have been face-to-face meetings, which are, of course, harder to schedule and coordinate. Nowadays, with all virtual meetings, we can get them a little more regularly, but even still, that only shortens the process a bit. And hopefully someday we will return to our in-person meetings. So now let's talk about that thing that I mentioned many, many times, this review, comment, and vote process. This is the guts, the core of what happens at ISO, because we do it over and over and over again. Basically what happens here is the document goes out for ballot. That's what we call it. Because what happens is that you, as a subject matter expert, will receive a document either from your national body or from the PDF Association. Again, if you're a member of our association, and you will then have the ability to put your comments into the comment template, and I'll review that with you momentarily, and then you submit a vote. You decide as an individual whether you wish to approve this document, you wish to approve it with comments. So if you have no comments, you just approve it. If you have comments, obviously you approve with comments. You can abstain if you have no reason to vote or just don't have anything to say. Or if you feel very, very concerned about what you're reading. So not only do you want to make comments, but you want the committee to know that you have negative feelings, you can vote negative with comments. Now, all of your individual comments get filtered up to your national body or to the PDF Association, where they're all aggregated together, and then a single vote, as I mentioned, is submitted by each of those bodies. So even if you said negative, if 50 other members of the association all said approve, then we'll probably bring all those comments together, but it's consensus. So the association would most likely send that through as approved with comments. And this is how it works. And the same thing is true for each of the individual countries. In many cases, there's also if you will, a pre-filtering. So what we do here in the association is our technical working groups will meet and review the proposed comments from the association to make sure that we as a technical working group are aligned on the comments that are going forward. And so that's another benefit of being an active member of our technical working groups, is you also get to make sure that your vote is heard, that your comments are represented when they go forward to the ISO itself. So this is the process. And then the comment template. This, you will come to either love or hate this document, but you will become very familiar with this document. It is a Microsoft Word file, and it is this big table, and you can't change it in terms of you can't resize columns, you can't start messing around with things at the top. What you can do is you can fill in individual rows, and you can add as many rows as you want based on your comments. Now, you'll see that I put black rectangles around 3 of the columns. That's because you as a subject matter expert should never, ever, 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 that's a lot of evers, fill in those columns. Those are for other people to fill in. Specifically, the first column and the last column get filled in either by the Secretariat or by the project leader. So don't ever put those in. In our standards, we never use line numbers because those are for ones where you actually have line numbers down the side. We don't do that in our standard. So we will never have line numbers. So don't ever put anything in the line number column. Instead, when you have a comment about something, so I copied something out of an old PDFX comment sheet. So here you'll see that the first commenter had an issue with clause 6, section 621. Paragraphs 1 and 2, and then an editorial comment. So they wrote the comment, what was the concern in the comments column, and then they had a proposed change in the proposed change column. And then because this was simply a textual change, they wanted to just delete some sentences, and those sentences didn't impact the technical nature of the document, they noted this as an editorial change. So that's why it says ed under type of comment. That's an editorial change. On the other hand, in the second line, they actually wanted a replacement of the requirement. So they wanted to replace the requirement with a different requirement. And because changing a requirement is what's called normative, it's technical. So if you change a requirement, that's a technical change, and you refer to that as a TE comment. Okay, and then the third line, again, it's just deleting a URL. That's not a big deal. That's an editorial change. And so you would just do these throughout the document, and you would just put every one of these things in your template, and then you would send it on along with your vote to your national body or to the association. So you will, as I said, come to know and love the comment template. Now, I mentioned earlier that you have to meet your date. Well, what happens if you don't? And we will admit here at the association and in our PDF standards, there have been a couple of times where we have not met our dates. We have just run out of time. Now, at that point, you have 2 choices. One choice is you let the clock run out, and then the project is dead. So unlike certain sports where letting the clock run out is a good thing, here we don't ever, ever, ever want to do it. Again, lots of evers in that statement. So we don't do that. It is bad for the project. Instead, what we do is we forcibly cancel the project. So most recently you saw this with PDF UA2. The committee realized that there was no way they could complete their work in the time frame required. It was going to require a lot of additional work. And so instead, we canceled the project. What that means is that, and again, this is a benefit of the alignment between the PDF Association and the ISO. We are now able to continue working within the auspices of the association on this document. So without a clock. So in a sense, we've taken it back to that NWI original proposal stage, and we're working on it in that fashion. And again, when we're ready, we will restart it. Now, we will restart it probably right back to the CD phase, because hopefully, we've done all of this work ahead of time. We believe that this time around, we'll get it right. And we don't have a choice, because you only get to cancel a project once. So this committee, the committee working on PDF UA2, for example, is not going to restart that clock until they are 100% sure that they've got a document that is going to make it. Because we absolutely cannot cancel it. If we don't make the dates, the project will die. And of course, none of us want that to happen. So we've been talking about the fact that there's kind of only one standard. But the reality is that's not true. The reality is that the ISO does a number of different types of documents. And specifically, there are 3 types of documents that we within the PDF committees work on. The most important one, the one that we do the most, the one that you're familiar with, are what are called international standards, or IS documents. So ISO 32000 and PDFA, ISO 19005, all of the things that you think of as the PDF standards are just that. They are international standards. They are a set of normative rules, guidelines, and such for, in our case, PDF. Okay? That is the normal type of document that we build as an IS. But we also have the opportunity, and in fact, you're going to see shortly, where we're now starting to build more TSs. And a TS, a technical specification, is also a normative work, but rather than being a final completed standard, it's a work in progress, if you will. It's a technical piece. It's something where we believe there is a future, but maybe not as its own separate standard. And we'll show you an example of this, and I'll explain why we're doing this shortly. And it's also an opportunity to, again, obtain feedback on that piece of work and really evolve it separately from something else in a more, slightly more agile manner than a full international standard. In addition, it's also possible to create something called a technical report. And so whereas technical specifications and international standards are normative, meaning that you have to follow the rules and the requirements, a report is informative. It's simply a bunch of information about something. And that could be anything from simply the results of a survey, an informative report, a state of the art, a best practice document. These would all be examples of TRs. However, here within the association, because we have the association and the ability to publish documents as the association, the types of documents that normally would come out of the ISO as a TR, we tend to publish ourselves within the association. So you won't really see us publishing any real ISO TRs. Instead, you'll see those documents coming out as association specifications or documents. The ISO also allows for a couple of other types of documents, publicly available specifications, workshops, guides. We don't do any of those within the PDF standards at this time, but there are things that are available to us should we ever have a use case for them. And there's standard processes for those within the ISO. So now, I've been talking a bit about some changes to the standards process within PDF. Let me go through those because I think it's very important. Now that you understand how the ISO process works, I'd like to talk about how we're going to be leveraging this going forward and why. So as most, if not all of you know, ISO 32000 Part 1 was the ISOization, if you will, of Adobe PDF 1.7. And one of the advantages of that was that there was 15 years of implementations that work was based on. And admittedly, most of that was Adobe documenting their own implementation. But the point is, there were implementations. So for every feature that is listed in ISO 32000 Part 1, there was at least one implementation on which to guarantee that that feature actually worked as documented in 32000 Part 1. One of the things, unfortunately, that we did not do in 32000 Part 2 was to mandate a similar requirement. So there are features that are documented in 32000 Part 2 that were not implemented by anyone prior to the finalization of that standard. And actually, I would argue that there are some that have still to this day not been implemented. And obviously, the lack of implementations and implementations prior to standardization have made it difficult to ensure interoperability amongst various vendors. So we as a committee recognize that that's a problem, and we're going to fix that going forward. And we're going to fix that in two key ways. The first is that additions to or changes to ISO 32000 Part 2 will now be done as what we call a PDF extension document. That means we will not be touching 32000 Part 2 itself, at least for the foreseeable future. So don't go looking for a Part 3 or anything else anytime soon. Instead, what you'll be looking for are these PDF extension documents. And these will either be TSs or ISs. Right now, all of them happen to be TSs. And for every one of these extensions, we will require 2 implementations by separate parties, assumably, and sample documents that actually demonstrate and include the capabilities. And so this way, we will ensure that any given capability has been implemented by at least 2 parties. We have some sample documents to work from, and this will all happen prior to the acceptance of that DIS. So basically, what we're doing is we're going to keep that standard in the CD phase, and we're not going to move it to the DIS phase until we have those implementations and documents. So let me tell you what the kinds of things we're working on, because hopefully I think you'll be interested, and maybe these are things that you would actually come and participate in at the ISO. So right now we have 4 active documents at the ISO right now, already allocated for TSs in various stages. So there's a document in WD stage on non-rectangular links. There is a document extending the 3D data formats for something called STEP, which is a popular 3D modeling methodology. And then there's a set of documents where we are advancing PDF encryption, hashing, and digital signatures. So it was time to update those capabilities, and so we have documents that are advancing those pieces of work. In addition, we have committees that are working on a couple of other areas. We have one that's investigating the future of raster image formats within PDF. We haven't updated to newer or more capable raster image formats in quite a while, so we're evaluating the state of the art. There's a desire, especially for pen input, to allow for variable with stroking when we draw, and also to record such information in annotations, especially ink annotations. And then the printing community in ISO TC 130, Working Group 2, has expressed a desire to enhance the PDF transparency model to better support device and end channel blending. So these are some of the pieces of work that are going on right now at the ISO in the various committees. And again, if you're a member of the association, you're part of that. And let me actually use that to wrap up, which is the fact that we are here to help. We're here to help you understand the process. We're here to help you get involved in the process, to work with you through the process. And that is why we strongly recommend that if you're not already, you become a member of our association, because that's going to get you access to all of the ISO standards related to PDF, past, present, and future. But not only do you have access to those documents, you're going to be able to comment on those documents. You're going to be able to attend those meetings. You are going to actively, if you choose, participate and get your say in what features you do and don't want in PDF, how you want them specified. You get to help make PDF what you believe PDF should be for you and your customers. And that includes even starting at the beginning. If you have ideas that you've always wanted to see in PDF and you just heard some examples of ones that have been coming in recently from various parties, you bring those into the association. Let's get those incubating. Let's get those working groups going. And let's figure out how we can bring new technologies and evolve PDF to the next level. So with that, I'm going to stop my presentation and I'm going to turn things over to Duff Johnson, who will handle the Q&A process for me today. Thank you very much.
Yep, and as Leonard, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'll be doing the Q&A process for Leonard in this webinar, as he was very unfortunately in the last minute unable to be here in person. So there are a couple of questions in the chat pod, in the question pod, and I encourage you to add your own questions if you do have them. The first question is, are primarily developers and suppliers represented in the working groups, or are there also user organizations in the ISO technical working groups? Great question, and the answer is it is indeed mostly suppliers, or that is to say developers and suppliers. But there are a significant variety of organizations that we might call consumers, generally speaking. I'm thinking of government agencies and the like who do have personnel who do monitor a PDF Association technical working groups through the vehicle of the liaison membership program, which I believe Leonard mentioned. And this is a facility wherein nonprofits and government agencies and the like are able to participate. In addition, in our liaison working groups, we do have we create the liaison working groups specifically to allow in individual cases to create a forum where end users or others, subject matter experts who don't necessarily want to become a member of the PDF Association are nonetheless able to participate in conversations on a very specific or vertical line of inquiry. Okay, so next question, can you please explain what happened to ISO 24517-2 PDF-E? And you remember correctly that it was in the disk state and it was actually canceled. And the reason PDF-E2 was canceled is that that project was integrated with PDF-A4. And so now all of the capabilities of the PDF-E2 concept have been rolled into the latest generation of PDF-A, PDF-A4, which is which includes a facility as PDF-A required for storing JavaScript internally in the file and accurate measurement and so on, a couple of the other attributes of PDF-E. And of course, very importantly, facilitated 3D annotations in PDF-A context so that engineering content in PDF documents could also be archived. So next question, is a country representation by country of residence or citizenship? Good question, and it's not obvious, but the answer is it's a representation by residence. So I believe the term is domiciled, and wherever you may happen to be domiciled, if you live in Germany or in the UK or in the US or somewhere else, then that is then the applicable member body. ISO member body for you will be the one of the country in which you're resident and not the country in which you're a citizen.